So since launching this channel back in November of 2023, I have read some absolutely amazing fantasy books. These 10, however, I genuinely regret picking up in the first place. Why? Because I don't DNF books. If I start on page 1, I will make it to the end. So sit back and enjoy as I share with you 10 books that I legitimately regret picking up in the first place. Hey everybody, welcome back to BellTube. I am Brian. Today we are talking about books that I've read that I did not like, that I truly do regret reading since I started the channel. So anything I've read prior to November of 2023 is not going to make it on this list. Now I know the title says 10 fantasy books. I did sneak in one sci-fi as well. So it is 9 fantasy and 1 sci-fi. The other part that I want to be really clear about is I left off any indie books from this list, period. Why? Because if somebody is brave enough to write their own book and self-publish it, I do not want to be the one kind of throwing rotten tomatoes at their hard work. They were brave enough to take the plunge. I'm going to let somebody else criticize their work. No, these are going to be only traditionally published books. Let's get into this. The first book we're going to talk about today, it's the heaviest one of the bunch. Look at this sucker. Wind and Truth, Book 5 in the Stormlight Archive, of course, by Brandon Sanderson. This is one beefy, big book. Yeah, I totally regret reading this. As a matter of fact, I'm starting to regret having read the Stormlight Archive in totality. I loved books 1 and books 2. Book 3 was pretty decent as well. I severely disliked book 4, and this, I think that Brandon Sanderson, in my opinion, has demonstrably become a worse writer. Just everything about that book, and if you want, I'll throw a link right here up to a video that I did for this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. In retrospect, I think I might even put it down to 2 stars. The plot was strange. The characters didn't act like themselves. I don't know what he was doing with the Cosmere, but the whole point of this big, long Stormlight Archive was that, it was going to be his magnum opus. And I've been a Brandon Sanderson fan really my whole adult life since he started writing books. But I don't know what happened to this Stormlight Archive that put it so far off the rails for me that I legitimately do not care about books 6 through 10. Plus, he says he's taken 8 to 10 years off before even coming out with, the next book, which is supposedly book 1 in the next 5-book arc. No desire there. I do regret reading Wind and Truth, but more importantly, I regret reading, Rhythm of War before it. So you stack those two together, and approximately 40% of Stormlight Archive I feel like I completely wasted my time on. Now, I will say this. If you're a huge Brandon Sanderson fan and you love these books, then I am truly happy for you. One thing that I do not do on this channel very often is rant about books, because I know things that I don't necessarily love might be your favorite. And so please don't let my personal subjective opinions kind of, yuck your yum, I think is what the saying is. Anyway, Wind and Truth. Big regret. Let's move on to the next one. And some of these I have physical and I'll hold them up for you. Some of them I only have on either ebook or I listen to them on audio, and I will show a graphic over here for those ones, starting with one that I did listen to on audio, and this is Weave World by Clive Barker. All right, let's put my cards on the table here. I'm not a big horror fan to begin with, so when you tell me that the author is Clive Barker, my brain immediately goes, I'm probably not going to like this book. So why did I read Weave World in the first place? Well, number 1, it's not a horror book, it's fantasy. Number 2, way back in the olden times, back in January of 2024, I did a monthly challenge that I invented called the DNF Challenge. I went to 7 booktubers that DNF'd particular books, and I said, give me one that you think was so bad that maybe you can break my DNF streak and I won't even finish it. Well, here's the thing. I'll put a card right here. You can see, how I did with that. But Madison Goodyear recommended Weave World by Clive Barker. And yeah, I did not like this book at all. I found myself, and I never really do this, but I found myself dialing up the audio speed just to get through the book. My range is normally about 1.5, sometimes 1.8, because I think studies have shown that we listen to or we physically read at about 1.8 times, what we can listen to. So that's how I kind of do my audiobooks. This thing I had cranked all the way up to the point where they sounded like the Chipmunks just to get through the book. And the sad thing about Weave World for me is that it had one of the greatest antagonists in a book that I've ever read. And I kept thinking to myself, what a crime. This is criminal. What a crying shame that this antagonist, who I just think is just perfect for this story, is inserted into a story that absolutely went nowhere for me. I regretted every moment listening to that book, but because, like I said, I don't DNF books, and it was part of a DNF challenge, I powered through it. Would you like Weave World? I don't really know. I know that John over at Talking Story absolutely loves it, but he's a big Clive Barker fan. Of course, Madison Goodyear did not like it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have suggested that for my challenge at all. Weave World coming in at number 2. By the way, I should also say none of these are ranked, right? These are just 10 books in totality. I'm not going like worst to the not as worst or not as worst to the worst. These are just 10 in total. Of course, by the way, if you like these kinds of lists, if you like kind of off-the-cuff thoughts about books and life and whatever else I feel like talking about, go ahead and like the video. It helps the channel grow a lot. And if you want to hang out with me a little bit more, click that subscribe button and you can see me in your feed a little bit more often. All right, what's the next one? The next one, another book that came from the DNF challenge. This came from Tory Tech, and this is Prince of Thrones. Sorry, is that what it's called? Yeah, sorry. No, it is not called that. It is called Prince of Thorns. I think Prince of Thrones would have been cooler. Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. Did not care for this book at all. Hated the main character. If you've read this series, you probably know why. This is fantasy, but it's kind of science fiction, sort of mixed together. If you read the series, you know what I'm talking about. It's a little bit of a red herring that it's fantasy, but for all intents and purposes, it is. This book, I don't know. I think if I really despise your main character, I'm going to have a tough time with this book. Now, like I said, I didn't DNF it. I finished it. Was I drawn to pick up the second book in the trilogy? Absolutely not. I did a dance around my house when I got done with Prince of Thorns. I wish it was Prince of Thrones because that sounds cooler, but Prince of Thorns was a blah. No bueno for me. There's my Spanish for the day. And talking about the DNF challenge, let's get back to the winner of the DNF challenge. Yeah, this book was given to me by Josh over at Red Fury Books, and this is N.K. Jemison's The Fifth Season. Book 1, I believe it's called The Broken Earth Cycle or something like that. I could be wrong. I'll correct myself in editing. Of course, if I'm wrong, by the way, I'm going to do most of this edit free. Yeah, N.K. Jemisin. I don't know what this book was about. I think it was sort of designed to be kind of a sci-fi fantasy, alternate something mystery. Here's the problem. I sussed out what was going on by about chapter 3. So the remainder of the book since chapter 3 was me basically verifying for myself, yeah, this is what I think is going on. Yep, this is what I think that was going on. Get to the end of the book, I'm like, well, big shocker here. I call that in chapter 3. I legitimately did not care about the destiny of any of the characters in this book. And while I am not, I think, what is called a character first reader, I can be a lot of different things. I can really gravitate to a character if there's one to gravitate to. I can really gravitate to an idea or a plot. If it's ultra compelling, then the characters don't need to be as developed because I see that's where the author is putting into their focus. But for this book, I have to say I regretted the plot. I regretted the characters. I legit regretted everything about the 5th season, you'll see it, like I said, if you click on that DNF challenge video, you'll know why even more in detail, but that was definitely one. Speaking of one that I did not expect to regret reading, and yet I did, we have one from the Quilluminati. Yeah, that's Mike, that's Philip, and that's John Minton and myself. And yeah, I'm going to surprise everybody here. And it's actually not The Vanished Birds, which I know you might have been thinking if you're a viewer of the channel. No, this is one that Mike picked. This is The Stress of Her Regard by Tim Powers. All right, when we did our Quilluminati talk on Mike's channel, I explained, I think, pretty well that I thought this book was extremely well written. Highest bar for quality that you could really reach, because Tim Powers is a very gifted and skilled author. The story, however, I was just so incredibly bored by. I had a hard time staying awake. I didn't really care what was going on. I think Philip described it as like alternate Gothic history or something along those lines. And there's a lot of 18th century poets or 19th century poets. I don't remember, but that should tell you what I thought of the book. I don't even remember what century that they're in, but I legit didn't care if the main character accomplished their goals or not. In fact, at some point, I think I was actually rooting for the antagonist to actually be an antagonist. We didn't really get that there. I found very little compelling about the book for me subjectively, but it was a weird one because objectively I could read it and understand this is objectively a really well-written book. Doesn't mean I have to like it, and I didn't. I regret it. That's why it's on this list. Sorry, Mike. All right, next book was a gift from my good friend Sarah Beth. Now, please, Sarah Beth, don't get mad at me. You knew this one was coming. Ben Aronovich's The Rivers of London. This is urban fantasy. This one really surprised me. I thought I was going to love this book, right? Because it's, like I said, urban fantasy set in London. Alex Verus is one of my favorite series by Benedict Jacka. I used to live in England. I used to live in Kensington at 123 Queensgate. Look it up if you like. That's where I lived. So I figured this is going to be a book absolutely for me. And oh my God, by the time I got to about chapter 3, I knew that Mike from Mike's Book Reviews was reading this at the same time that I was. And we started texting each other going, is it just me, or is this like the most British thing we've ever read? And like I said, I used to live there, so you wouldn't think that this would bother me as much as that it did. But between that and a very unlikable protagonist and a mystery that, once again, I just didn't care if this cop solved the mystery, this was a big regret. Now, do I regret having tried this? I don't know. I know sooner or later I would have read Rivers of London, but yeah, in the top 10 regret lists, 100%. Yeah, speaking of going back to England, speaking of, I think I talked about Alex Verus a moment ago, let's get into his author, Benedict Jacka, because as much as I love the Alex Verus series, The Inheritance of Magic, huge regret. Oh my God. Now, I had heard that this was going to be more on the YA side, which is completely fine, right? I love Harry Potter. I love, my God, Tana, The Tenacious Tale of Tana, the Tender Sword was an SBFBO book that I put through. It's a middle grade book, so I am not opposed to reading material that is intended for a younger audience. But this is just not a good book, at least for me. I did not care about this the protagonist at all. I'm not even sure who or what the antagonist is, because I think that's probably going to get covered in the next book, which I know is already out. Will I be going to get the next book? Well, clearly no, not if this is in my top 10 regrets since I started the channel book. Yeah, In an Inheritance of Magic absolutely did not work for me. We're going to get into another one that didn't work for me that was a sequel book, which I know that most of you have not read yet. And most of you have probably not even started the series yet. So I hesitated a moment to put this on the list because I do recommend the series. The series is the Arcane Ascension series by author Andrew Rowe, and the book in question is book 5, and it's called When Wizards Follow Fools. And I felt like the fool when I was reading this book because I don't know what Andrew Rowe was thinking. He dove into the minutia of what this guy does for magic, so much so that I felt like I was reading basically a math book. So if you're a mathematician and you are super into reading very dry mathematics, this might be a book for you, but not really the series, because the series itself, Arcane Ascension's great, but book 5, wow, I was like, gosh, I regret this only insofar as I would have liked to have it on my TBR indefinitely, right? So I'd always have this book out there that I was excited that, at some point I'm going to get to this book. I regret actually getting to that book. Let's talk about a couple of audiobooks because they're very different and I didn't like them for very different reasons. The first one is Christopher Buehlman's The Black-Tongue Thief. Now, do I regret this book? I only regret the method in which I consumed this book. I listened to it rather than read it. I actually think The Black-Tongue Thief would have been a book that I enjoyed had I actually sight read the book. The reason why I don't like the audio, and I know I probably only fall into a small percentage that feels this way, but I gotta be straight with you guys, I hated the narrator's choice of how he performed the audio. Now, the narrator also happens to be the author, Christopher Buehlman. He is a Renaissance man. Literally, he works at Renaissance festivals. And he decided to voice this book entirely in a very, very thick, apparently Irish brogue. Now, if you like that for 15 to 20 hours or however long this book is, then hats off to you. Kudos, luck of the Irish to you, as they say. Or I don't know if anybody really says that, but for now, sure, luck of the Irish. I hated it. I couldn't understand a third of the word the guy was saying. It wrecked the story for me. It pulled me right out of the immersion completely when I have absolutely no idea what this guy was saying. As a matter of fact, I don't even think I knew what the main character's name was for at least a third of the book. So I don't regret the experience of knowing what The Black-Tongue Thief is about. I purely regret deciding to do it on audio versus actually sight reading it. If I had the time, maybe I'd go back and sight read it, but you guys, I don't have the time. All right, let's talk about the 10th one, right? And then we're going to do a one for the road that I think is going to be valuable for you for sure. Also, I should say thank you to all the patrons of this channel. Patreon is listed in the description. It's less than $2 a month. We've got a super intimate community and it is a lot of fun. Some of them I talk to once a month on the phone. It's actually very fun. All right, let's talk about the 10th book here that I regret reading. Again, from the DNF Challenge. This is the aforementioned Mike from Mike's Book Reviews selection for me. And this is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu. Yeah, I told you there was a science fiction one on this list. I snuck it right in there. Three-body problem. All right, here's my 3 bodies of problems with this. Number 1, I am fine with books that are just about ideas. There's no problem there. I love classic sci-fi. So it's not just that the characters are flat, which they completely are in the first book at least. I have not read books 2 and books 3. I have booktube friends that this is their all-time favorite series. So, your mileage may and, very well could vary on this series. But yeah, flat characters didn't really do it for me. I did enjoy the game part of the 3-body problem. I thought that was immensely creative. So points for that. Take away points for sort of almost like an alternate history of what was going on in the East at the time. I understand what the author was trying to do about China, and yeah, it didn't really fit for what I would particularly pick up and read subject matter wise. Third reason, the narrator himself, Luke Daniels, who did the audiobook for this, happens to be a top 10 narrator for me, right? So it's not that he did a poor job. However, in one of the characters, one that I actually liked, he's kind of like this gritty detective, right? And I would think that he would have kind of a gritty detective's kind of voice, whatever that might sound like to you. Luke Daniels decided to use the same voice that he uses as an animal companion in the Iron Druid Chronicles by Kevin Hearn, which is basically a comic relief character. So it completely pulled me out of the element of my favorite character in the entire story, right? This gritty detective sounding like Oberon, the Irish wolfhound. Didn't work for me. And it was funny because I messaged Mike as I was, reading this, and I got to a point and I said, I bet this is exactly where Mike put the book down, and I think I was within about 20 pages of that. So it's good to know your book friends, your booktube friends' taste sometimes. And so yeah, Three Body Problem, I do regret reading it. It took a lot of time to do. It was confusing for me to listen to on audio. That's another one that I think if I could do it all over again, I would sight read it, and maybe I would get more out of the book, maybe more like the author intended me to do. Let's do one for the road today, and this video is called 10 books that I regret reading. So let's talk about regret for a second in our one for the road. How many of you, raise your imaginary hands off screen, right? If you have regrets, of course we all do. The question is what do we do about them, right? So some of us have learned over time that regrets can kind of serve as learning experiences, right? A method to go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Next time I'll do this, right? And we use them to learn from our past a little bit. On the other hand, a lot of us have some pretty deep-seated regrets that we don't really learn from, but we ruminate on them. Now, again, symbolically raise your hand if you've ever found yourself ruminating on a decision that you made or something that you did in the past that you've still not forgiven yourself for, that you still have this lingering sense of regret that draws you down. It's really common, and I think for the one for the road, what I'd like to ask you and pose you this question is, how long are you going to punish yourself for a decision that you made? Perhaps you made it with the best information you had at the time, right? And yet you've given yourself a sentence, almost like a prison sentence, longer than somebody who goes out and does some terrible crime and gets a life sentence of 20 years. Some of you guys have been punishing yourself for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years or longer, where, if it happened to your friend, that exact same situation, that exact same decision, you would be knocking them on the head saying, you know what, this happened a long time ago. Forget about it. Move on. Learn something from it if you can. Try not to do it again and move on. Don't put yourself in mental and emotional jail for an indefinite period of time for just some decision that you made, because guess what? You're a human being and you're probably gonna make some mistakes in this world. That's just kind of how life works. So that's my challenge for you today for the one for the road. Think about a regret that in your heart you've been holding on to for too long, and make an active decision for yourself. Ask yourself this question: how much longer do I want to carry that regret? And if the answer is you know what, I think my life would feel a lot lighter if I was not carrying around this burden of regret that I have been basically tugging along with me everywhere I go, mentally and emotionally, for a very long time. If that's the answer, then drop the regret, right? Learn from it, move on, feel a little bit lighter, and go about and enjoy the rest of your life, because guess what? You're still going to make some bad decisions. At least have some new regrets to regret than the old ones that you've been carrying along. That's what I've got for you guys today. I am really fired up for some videos that I've got coming up, but I'd love to know in the comments, what are some books that you regret reading? Now, I may, I'm for sure going to meet you in the comments, but I'm interested to know if these are also books that I've read that I forgot to put on my list. And again, this is only since the beginning of this channel. Maybe if you like this kind of video, let me know in the comments if you want me to go back and do all-timer regrets. Because you guys know, I'm looking at you, Lev Grossman. There's some books out there that I read prior to starting this channel that did not make the list, and maybe that's what you want next time. Till then, stay positive, everybody. And of course, here's your fortune.